Quando ele também está disponível, também liga para mim. A relação saudável.
Fellow global citizens, we must, however, touch on some key international issues that require our attention, and first and foremost, we must speak about the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. It must be understood that as the EFF, we believe that the conflict between these two nations must be resolved, and it must be resolved peacefully. We want to make it categorically clear, however, that we believe the conflict arises because of NATO's uncontrollable desire to infringe on the territorial integrity of Russia by setting up military capacity on its borders. That is the genesis of the conflict. It is the breaking of treaties that were adopted during the fall of the Soviet Union, and that must be condemned as much as we may condemn the war itself. We have noted the communication from Cyril Ramaphosa's office that Russia President Vladimir Putin will not attend the next month's BRICS summit in South Africa. It is our understanding that President Putin's withdrawal is a consequence of South Africa state's reluctance to be firm on international affairs and their inability to resist pressure from NATO to arrest President Putin. South Africa is at the current stage led by an individual who cannot take a firm position on any matter, even if his life depends on it. We therefore want to caution all nations represented here today, especially members of BRICS, that South Africa is currently led by a spineless government that will never meaningfully take forward efforts to grow the strength of the global South and its allies. Any effort to fight against imperialism, the calls for de-dollarization, and for an alliance that will place BRICS nations on a stronger footing in the globe will always be undermined by a cowardly government in South Africa. Members of the international community, we hope that countries such as China and India will, in solidarity with President Putin, not allow their presidents to attend the BRICS summit. Because what South Africa did to President Putin, it's a serious humiliation of a sitting president. And in solidarity and as BRICS members, heads of states of those countries should also stay away from attending BRICS, because South Africa's foreign policy and its sovereignty has been undermined by NATO forces and the USA. Members of the international community, we take this opportunity to call for a meaningful solidarity with Palestine. Under the EFF government, there will not be the Israeli embassy in South Africa until there is peace in Palestine. We must not just pay a lip service when people are dying in their numbers. The people of Palestine continue to suffer unspeakable human rights violations, and their land is annexed constantly. Their children are murdered, their sites to practice religion are destroyed, while the whole world watches. I say so because we are the beneficiaries of international solidarity ourselves. If there was no international solidarity support to South Africa, we're not going to be where we are. And this is our turn to also show support to all those who are being oppressed by other nations. We want the people of Western Sahara to have their land back without any interference by Morocco. But Morocco and Western Sahara should exist as brothers and sisters and not see each other as enemies. We're asking for peace and long-lasting solution between Western Sahara and Morocco. And that peace should be characterized by the release of the land of the people of Western Sahara. We must not fear intimidation or loss of funding simply because we are too scared to condemn the crimes against the people who violate the rights of others. We want to make the same call with regards to our friends and comrades in Cuba who suffer under the yoke of trade embargoes because they dare to be socialist. The trade embargoes against Cuba must be lifted, as it is inhuman to punish a nation for taking different ideological leaning with regard to how they run their society. The Cubans helped us fight for our liberation in Africa. They continue to help the whole world with quality health care interventions, and they don't send soldiers to go and bombard other people's nations. They send doctors to go and save life and make sure that our people receive the primary health care. We are calling for an end to ideologically inspired sanctions by nations in the West that are used as a tool to undermine the sovereignty of nations in the global South and Africa. We call for lifting of sanctions in Zimbabwe, not that we agree with the people, with the government of Zimbabwe or the president of Zimbabwe, but it is the people, the ordinary people of Zimbabwe, who are suffering under these sanctions. And we want the sanctions lifted, and we want the people of Zimbabwe, particularly those who are in South Africa, to return back to Zimbabwe and make their own determination as to how they want their country to succeed. But that country will never succeed under the sanctions. Africa has been independent for more than 60 years, yet we experience challenges of development even after 6 years of independence. The Western countries cannot live without African continent, using our fellow African brothers to destroy ourselves. We want peace in Mali and welcome the dropping of French as an official language in Mali. That is one progressive movement. Doesn't mean French cannot be spoken, but to say we have conquered the imperialists and colonizers and continue to have their languages as official languages is self-imprisonment. We call for peace in the land of Thomas Sankara of Burkina Faso, who paid the price of his own blood by the coup orchestrated by the Western. We call for peace in Sudan and reconciliation of the Sudanese people, who are tired to see the silence of the international community towards the continuous bloodshed in the eastern DRC. The Western countries supporting some neighboring countries in DRC to destabilize the eastern DRC. We shouldn't find it exciting that African countries can fight amongst themselves with ease, especially fighting around territorial expansions. Africa is one country, it's not even a continent. These borders we see and we experience here in our continent were imposed on us by the imperialists. No African brother should derive pleasure out of killing other African people. We say this because we are advocating for one Africa with one currency, with one legislature, with one military and one president. Because we believe that these small pockets of countries are the ones that make international communities undermine Africa. Just imagine one president of Russia or America calling all the presidents of all countries to their countries to be addressed by one president. We see that as belittling and undermining our continent. We believe that if we have one currency based on our mineral and natural resources, it will be one such a strong currency, and it will place Africa firmly on the international table. The coal power stations that were decommissioned will recommission them. Because you can't decommission a power station for green energy that gives you less than what that power station was giving you. It's illogical. We are all for green. We are all for clean energy, but not at the detriment of the economy of South Africa. We cannot destroy our base to appease USA and the UK. If the green gives me 2,000 megawatts, whatever I'm going to decommission should be giving me 2,000 megawatts or even less. So I know I decommission this one, and the alternative is this one, and therefore I don't run short of what I'm requiring to sustain the economy of South Africa and to give our people a reliable electricity. So we also are going to stop this thing of taking out our clean energy, our clean coal to outside countries and leaving us here with a dirty coal and being told we are polluting. The pollution, whether it happens in China, whether it happens in the UK, whether it happens in Germany, whether it happens in the USA, is going to affect us even here in South Africa. So why is there a story that we must not use coal in South Africa, yet we see tons, millions and millions of tons being taken out of South Africa? Where are they going? The story should not be let's decommission coal power stations. The story should be coal because it's not clean and it's not good for the environment. Let's stop mining coal at all. So no one uses coal. It can't be that South Africa must not use coal, but other people are using coal. It's wrong. So there's no coal that is going to live here. We're going to make sure that we produce enough and reliable and clean coal, and we'll engage with our own allies in the form of China and to come with new technology to deal with emission. So we need to make sure that that which we say other people must not do, we don't do ourselves. Because to ask of us to self-destruct and use us as an experiment in exchange for money and to killing of our people, because this load shedding has killed a lot of people here in South Africa, has killed a lot of businesses here in South Africa, and you can all feel it. Yet, we must be the first ones to be used as an experiment. You need a very firm leadership that will prioritize the interest of the country before any other thing and not sell the country to the highest bidder. China can help us, even with load shedding. We need a government that has got interests and that negotiate good terms and say to China, build it, operate it, and hand it over to South Africa. The Chinese will never refuse to do that. They've never refused to do that. But because we are hell-bent at our alliances with the West and America, we've missed opportunities to strengthen our own economy through fostering working relationship with countries that will not destroy us. China is not going to colonize Africa. The problem is your corrupt leaders who go to China with empty bags and come back with money. They want money and they negotiate with money in their mind. So you come to me like that, I will also dribble you. So go there with proper ideas, not with corrupt mentality. There's no China that wants to colonize anyone. How do you get colonized now when you are the negotiator? South Africa has surrendered a port now in Durban now. That's colonialism, where you just take your port and give it to other people, surrendering your sovereignty, and later you are going to say people have colonized you. When you go to China and say, give us a power station in exchange for OR Tambo Airport, why would they miss that opportunity? It's not them, it's your stupidity as leaders. There is no policy of China. We have gone through it many times that seeks to colonize anyone. But if people go there with better ideas, it's not a problem of China. It's their own problem. No socialist organization, and socialism teaches us that we can't engage in imperialist program. We can't engage in colonialist program. We intervene where necessary, and intervention does not mean interference. And that's what inspires that relationship with countries like China and Cuba too. The Cubans, you go to them, you seek solution, they will provide it. And then they don't say, give us this, give us that. It's South Africa that says, in exchange, we'll give you this. And when we give the Cubans the money that we are giving them, when we get accused, we over-explain ourselves that which we offered to the Cubans. The money to Cuba is not necessarily to pay for the doctors. It's a solidarity fund. We are in solidarity with Cuba and will double that money when we take over government. Because Cuba did not give us money. It gave us life. People died fighting for our democracy. Why should we be told by people who oppressed us that Cuba joined us to fight against how we must relate with Cuba? We cannot allow that. The war in Mozambique is exactly what I spoke about. But the problem, you are right, is this foreign interests that are interfering and even sponsoring the killing of each other in Mozambique. We should not, as Africans, anywhere, because we are rejected, we are hated everywhere, we should not find it easy to fight with each other. It must be the most painful and the most difficult thing for an African to take up guns and shoot at another African. Because if others can do it, they will do it with ease. It must be difficult for us. We are hated everywhere in the world. We are treated like we are not human beings. Why should we treat each other like that ourselves? That's why the EFF here in South Africa is told every time that we won't vote for you because you want foreigners in our country, you protect foreigners in our country. So be it. We're not going to kill Africans in exchange for votes. I will rather stay at home in the villages because that is not just us. So we are for Africans, and Africans everywhere must always find African solution to their problems without Sasol's interference, without France's interference, without British interference. We need to sit down and find solutions of Africa by Africans and not this borrowed interference that we see all the time. So we are aware of what's happening in Mozambique, and we will make sure that the government of the EFF finds an African solution which is going to be permanent and not driven by foreign company or multinational companies' interests.